So, just to give some of the listeners a feel for where you've worked against autocratic threats, Belarus, Burma, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, Serbia. I'm sure I'm missing some, but I was really struck in looking back at your book in your thank yous to the folks that you had worked side by side with in those really critical situations. And you referenced in your acknowledgments your fellow freedom fighters. And I'm wondering if you can just talk to us about the meaning of that phrase to you and its relevance today here in America.
I think there's a couple of things. So I traveled all over the world. And, if you were to think of anybody in the audience were to think of an autocrat, I've either worked with the opposition to them or I likely pioneered some of the tactics that are being trained to them today. Um, when I use the term, so when I would get asked to travel to all these places, and I remember distinctly one time being in the Middle East, and it was young Iranians really who had come. They'd traveled outside the country because obviously I couldn't go to Iran and it wasn't safe to do it there. And I was working with them about how do they mobilize, resistance, nonviolent. And I remember looking out in the audience. I could do my presentation in my sleep because I've traveled all over the world and done it so many times. But I remember standing there looking at him, and this would happen inevitably every time I was speaking to people. Look at him, and I'd think, if it were me and I faced this at home, would I be like one of the people risking like being kicked out of school or losing my job or being thrown in the clink to to be here listening to me? And then inevitably what would happen is I had developed somewhat of a reputation, mostly because people like Putin and Lukashenko were attacking me. Hugo Chavez did too. Um, and I had developed a bit of a reputation. So inevitably, when the first break would come, somebody would come up to me and they'd say, "You're brave for coming here to work with us." And I remember the reason I say that there was this young Persian girl. I don't know how old she was. She wasn't that much more older than my daughter is today, who's 15. She came up to me and she said, "You're so brave to be here. You're a hero." And I remember thinking, I'm not a hero and I'm not that brave. I get to go home to Vilnius, Lithuania or back to the US. Like, you're going back to Tehran. And if they figured out that you were here, you're in a bad way. Like, that's so brave. Like these people, and it was at that point that I really got what John McCain used to always say. Anybody who listened to McCain, he'd always talk about a cause greater than self.
Mm.
And when I talk about freedom fighters, what I really mean is people who are putting country or common interest ahead of self interest, you know? And most people who are doing that don't even think of themselves that way. But there's to fight and stand for democracy oftentimes requires putting the interest of your country or your commonality or even the people that you're fighting together with ahead of your self-interest. The boys running off the boat in the beaches of Normandy were participating in a cause greater than self for literally in some cases 6 inches of sand before they were going to fall, and they knew that. But that's what I mean by people who are freedom fighters.